She told him he wasn't the father. She told him he wasn't the father, and he believed her. Years later, he saw a little boy with his eyes and knew the devastating truth. Maria Carter never expected her world to crumble in a matter of seconds. In one moment, she was standing in the soft glow of Daniel's penthouse kitchen, her heart racing as she clutched the positive pregnancy test in her hand. The next, she was being ushered into the cold, echoing office of his parents, the very people who had barely acknowledged her existence until now. The message was clear, cruel, and absolute. She wasn't welcome. The gay's name, legacy, and lineage were not to be diluted by someone like her. She wasn't rich. She didn't come from influence, and she didn't belong in their world. They offered her money first, a life of comfort in exchange for disappearing. When she refused, they smiled, slowly, calculatingly, and threatened everything she cared about, including Daniel's future. Maria had no doubt they could deliver. She had seen how Daniel longed for success, how he idolized his father's empire, how he had built his life, brick by perfect brick, around a dream they had forged for him. If she stayed, if she told him the truth, he would be forced to choose between her and the only life he had ever known. She didn't believe he was cruel, but she also wasn't sure he was strong enough to stand up to them. So when they asked her to lie, she agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bear to see him destroyed. When she met him the next day, her heart was already broken. Daniel looked at her with the same warmth, the same casualness, never suspecting that the woman he loved had been cornered. She told him she had something to say, and then, keeping her hands clasped and her eyes on the floor, she lied. "You're not the father," she said, her voice hollow. "It's someone else's. I'm sorry." He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He asked questions. He just stood there for a long moment, hurt, slowly replacing confusion. And then he left. It was the last time she ever saw him. Maria didn't cry right away. She waited until the apartment door was closed, until the silence was too loud to ignore. And then the tears came, silent, endless, filled with guilt. She packed what little she owned and left the city in a matter of days, changing her number, closing her accounts, and trying to erase a chapter that still lived inside her with every heartbeat. She was 24, unemployed, pregnant, alone. The months that followed were brutal. She found a modest room to rent in a small town several hours away, picked up shifts at a coffee shop through morning sickness, and attended nursing classes at night. Every dollar mattered. Every decision was about survival. When her belly grew too big to hide, she wrapped it in oversized sweaters and worked until her feet ached. There were no baby showers, no excited calls home, no one to celebrate the first kick or ultrasound. But Maria held her head high and whispered to her unborn son every night, promising him that she would love him enough for two. And when Leo finally arrived, with his blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the man she once loved, she felt her heart fracture and heal all at once. He was perfect. He was hers. And he was also a reminder of everything she had lost. Still, Maria never regretted the choice she made. Not once. It protected him. It gave him peace. That had to be enough, even if it cost her everything. A new life. Life in the small town wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And for Maria, that stability became her salvation. After Leo was born, the days blurred together, waking before dawn to make his bottle, feeding him in the pale morning light, rocking him through colic and fevers, kissing his cheek when he smiled in his sleep. She had no partner to share the weight of parenthood, no family to lean on, and she certainly had no time for regret. But what she lacked in help, she made up for in determination. Every time she looked at Leo's tiny fingers or caught the way he stared at her with those vivid blue eyes, she was reminded of why she made the choices she did. He was the reason she kept going. He was the reason she smiled, even when her body begged her to lie down and stop. She worked part-time at the local clinic while finishing the last part of her nursing certification. The clinic supervisor, a woman named Janice, with a no-nonsense voice and kind eyes, had noticed the fatigue in Maria's posture early on, but never asked about it. She would simply offer an extra break here and there. Sometimes she'd slide her a hot coffee without asking. Janice wasn't exactly warm, but she saw people, and Maria never forgot it. In the evenings, after work and classes and grocery runs with a stroller that squeaked embarrassingly loud, Maria would bathe Leo, put him in soft pajamas, and they'd cuddle on their second-hand couch. Worn but clean. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment above a bookstore, where the radiator clanked all winter and the ceiling fan hummed when it spun too fast. But the windows lit up with golden afternoon light, and the place smelled of paper and cinnamon from the bakery next door. Maria made it feel like home. There were photographs taped to the refrigerator, Leo's handprints on a crookedly hung canvas on the wall, and a stack of children's books by the bed they shared. At first, she thought motherhood would feel like an endless uphill climb, a long struggle for survival. But as Leo grew, so did her strength. He started talking early, calling her Mama before his first birthday, and learning his colors by pointing out cereal boxes in the grocery aisle. He loved music, always dancing to commercials and jingles, with chubby legs that barely held him upright. He had Daniel's laugh, a low, sudden burst that took her by surprise and stole her breath every time. Maria didn't talk about Daniel, not to anyone, not even to herself. But she kept a photograph tucked away in a shoebox at the bottom of her closet. An old picture taken during a weekend trip to the coast, when she and Daniel were blissfully unaware of the storm that was coming. He had his arms wrapped around her from behind, both of them smiling into the camera, sand on their jeans. She hadn't looked at the photo in years, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It was a memento of a life that could have been, if things had been different. Sometimes, when Leo was asleep and the world was silent, she would lie on her back and allow herself to feel the grief she had ignored for so long. She would wonder if Daniel ever thought about her, if he ever regretted leaving, if he believed the lie she told him that day. She doubted it. He probably had a new life now, a sleek wife, a corner office, with no idea that he had a son who had inherited his very same smile. One day, while walking Leo to preschool, another mother complimented her on how well-behaved her son was. Maria smiled and thanked her, but as they walked away, the woman said something that left her frozen. "He has your heart and someone else's eyes." Maria didn't reply. She just squeezed Leo's hand a little tighter and kept walking. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't have the luxury of thinking about the future much, but for now, she had forged something stable, something safe, something completely her own. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fair, but it was hers. And though she didn't say it out loud, a part of her still harbored a silent hope that one day the truth would come out, not in chaos or bitterness, but in a way that would allow her son to know where he came from, not just from her, but from the man who never had the chance to love him. Until then, she would keep building the life they deserved, brick by brick, silently and stubbornly. A devastating truth. The air was fresh and crisp the morning Daniel Hayes arrived in the small town of Fairhill. He hadn't been there in years, not since he was a teenager, visiting distant relatives for a summer retreat. Now, as a guest speaker for a regional charity initiative aimed at improving access to children's health care. He found himself walking down streets lined with quaint storefronts, warm brick buildings, and sleepy sidewalks. Everything about the town felt different from the sharp glass and steel skyline of Boston. Slower, softer, quieter. He hadn't expected it to feel like a relief. Daniel had changed in the last 4 years. The man who once took pride in his composure and control now found himself carrying a subtle bitterness, a weariness that followed him even into sleep. Ever since the day Maria told him the child wasn't his, something inside him had fractured. He had buried the pain quickly, as he had been taught to do, and had turned it into focus, success, expansion. He was now more powerful than ever, more respected, and yet more alone. Every relationship since Maria had felt hollow, every practiced smile, every empty kiss. He never told anyone why he had stopped dating for more than a few weeks. No one ever asked. The event was held at the town library, newly renovated with donations from a dozen regional sponsors, including his own company. After the speech, a small reception was held in the adjacent park. Children were running between benches, while parents gathered under white tents with coffee and pastries. Daniel was standing near a table, politely answering questions from local officials, when he saw something, or rather, someone, that made the entire world shrink to a pinpoint. It was a boy, about 4 years old, blonde hair, bright blue eyes. The kind of blue you didn't see often. The kind of blue Daniel saw every day in the mirror. The boy was laughing as he ran toward the playground, his arms outstretched like airplane wings, gently bumping into a woman's legs. The woman knelt, brushed the hair from the boy's face, and said something that made him laugh again. Daniel couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything. Because the woman, the one who turned her face to the sun in that moment, was Maria. His heart stopped. It was her. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was a little longer, her frame a bit thinner, as if life had been less kind than she deserved. But her presence hit him like a punch to the chest. He hadn't seen her in 4 years. He hadn't heard her voice. He hadn't allowed himself to imagine what her life was like now. And here she was, and she had a son. A son who looked exactly like him. The pieces clicked into place in his mind, violently and completely. His breath caught in his throat. That boy wasn't someone else's child. He was his. He had to be. Daniel turned away from the table, barely excusing himself as he walked across the grass toward them, his feet heavy, his heart deafening. As he drew closer, Maria turned, sensing someone near. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, everything that had been buried came to the surface. Surprise, panic, guilt, and something else. Hurt. Maria didn't speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes darted to Leo, then back to Daniel. He stared at her, searching her face for some kind of explanation, but all he could utter was a single, trembling question. Is he mine? Her hands tightened around Leo's shoulders. The boy looked up at him with curiosity, sensing the tension, but too young to understand it. Maria swallowed hard. She didn't nod. She didn't deny. She just stood there, frozen, and whispered, "Daniel, please." He looked back at this boy, then at her. The anger that rose inside him wasn't the kind that explodes. It was deeper, colder. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You told me he wasn't mine." Tears began to gather in her eyes, but she held them back. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't have a choice. Your parents." "I believed you," he cut in. "I believed what you said, and I walked away because I thought I had no right to stay." Maria knelt beside Leo, whispering something in his ear. The boy nodded and ran back to the playground, looking back once. Then he was gone. She stood up slowly, facing Daniel again, the dam behind her eyes finally giving way. They told me to disappear, that I would ruin your life. They threatened to destroy mine. I was scared, Nick. I was pregnant, alone, and they made me feel like I didn't belong near you. He didn't know what to say. The fury inside him wasn't just toward her. It was toward himself, toward his parents, toward the years that had been stolen from all three of them. How old is he? He asked quietly. 4, she replied. His name is Leo. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. 4 years. He had missed every first. The first word, the first step, the first time Leo had fallen and needed comforting. He had missed it all, and the boy didn't even know he existed. I didn't know how to fix it, Maria said softly. I thought I was protecting you, and then it just felt too late. It's not too late, Daniel said, though his voice cracked. He's my son, and I want to know him. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Hesitantly. Painfully. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door he was willing to walk through. The beginning of healing. Maria had not planned on ever seeing Daniel again. Never. That part of her life had been sealed, buried under layers of exhaustion, survival, and the quiet resignation of someone who had made peace with grief. But after the confrontation in the park, everything that had once been closed began to reopen, and it terrified her. The way Daniel had looked at Leo was something she would never forget, as if he were seeing his entire world and losing it all at once. And now, for the first time since the day she lied to him, the truth was out. The weight of it felt unbearable. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling while Leo slept beside her, a tiny hand curled against her shoulder. Her mind replayed every word, every expression, the way Daniel's voice had cracked when he said, I want to know him. There was no denying the sincerity on his face. He hadn't screamed or angrily accused her. He had looked broken, betrayed, and quietly desperate. It would have been easier if he had just walked away or called her cruel, but he hadn't. He had stayed. The next morning, Maria called in sick to work and took Leo to the lake just outside of town. She needed space to think, to breathe, to look at her son, and remind herself of why she had done what she did. Leo skipped rocks across the water, laughing as they splashed, completely oblivious that his entire world had just changed. He didn't know his father had seen him. He didn't know the man who had disappeared before his birth now wanted to be a part of his life. Maria watched him, her heart aching with love and fear. How could she possibly explain to a 4-year-old boy that his father had been pushed away before he had a chance? That night, there was a knock at the door. She knew who it was before she looked. Daniel was in the hallway, holding a paper bag with 2 coffees and a small box of pastries. He looked tired, but not angry. She stepped aside and let him in, not trusting her voice enough to speak. Leo was still asleep in the other room. Daniel didn't sit down right away. He walked once around the small apartment. Then he turned to look at her. I need to understand, he said. Everything. I deserve to know. So she told him. Every detail. She told him how his parents had called her after she found out she was pregnant, how they had offered her money, how they had called her unworthy, how they had painted him as someone who would resent her for ruining his life. She told him about the threats, how they had promised to destroy her future, block her from jobs, from stability. She told him about the fear, the isolation, the humiliation of being treated as nothing more than a mistake. Daniel sat in silence, his jaw clenched, his fists closed. She could see the storm in his eyes, the fury not directed at her, but at the people he had once trusted the most. They lied to us both, he said quietly. They robbed me. Him. You. Maria nodded, her throat tight. I didn't want to believe they could be that cruel, but they were, and I let them scare me. I let them decide my life. Daniel moved to the window and stared out at the small street below. I hate that I believed you, that I didn't fight harder to understand why you would say something like that. You couldn't have known, she said. I made it sound final. I wanted it to be clean. It wasn't clean. It was hell, he replied, turning back to her. I've spent 4 years wondering what I did wrong, why you would cut me off so completely. I hated myself for trusting you, and I hated you for not trusting me. I hated myself too, she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was the kind that comes after wounds have been exposed, raw, but healing. Daniel took a deep breath. I want to be a part of Leo's life, not just visits. I want to know him, love him, raise him. Even if you never forgive me, I won't walk away again. Maria watched him carefully. It won't be simple. He doesn't know who you are. He's never asked. He thinks daddies are something other children have, but it's never made him sad. I don't want this to be harder for him, Daniel said, but I won't pretend he isn't mine. I've lost too much time already. She hesitated, her hands clasped in her lap. If you're serious about this, you need to show him, not just tell me. You can't disappear. You can't get overwhelmed and run away. I won't, he said, his voice firm. I'm not the same man you left, and I'm not here to take him away from you. I'm here to earn a place in his world. Maria felt something shift inside her. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. For the first time in 4 years, she saw a version of the man she once loved standing in front of her. Not the CEO, not the heir, not the obedient son, but the man who had laughed with her on beaches and kissed her silently on the forehead, and once asked her what she would name a son if she ever had one. She looked toward the hallway where Leo was sleeping. Then come back tomorrow, she said. Come for him, and we'll see where it goes. Daniel nodded. I will. And as he walked out, something in her, something that had been buried under guilt and fear, began to breathe again. A quiet partnership. Daniel returned the next day right after breakfast, dressed casually in jeans and a soft navy sweater, carrying a small bag with children's books and a toy dinosaur he had nervously picked up at the local shop. Maria opened the door slowly, unsure of how Leo would react. Leo still didn't know who Daniel was, but he was naturally open-hearted, endlessly curious, and often confident in a way only small children could be. She watched from a distance as Daniel knelt to his height, introducing himself carefully with a warm but cautious smile. Hi, he said softly, holding out the dinosaur. I'm Nick. I brought this guy because he heard there was a cool boy living here. Leo looked at him with big blue eyes, almost mirroring Daniel's, and then took the toy. He clutched it in both hands and whispered a shy, "Thank you." Maria exhaled slowly. The tension in her shoulders eased a little. There was no instant recognition or magical connection, but there was something soft and natural about the way Leo warmed up to him in minutes. The two of them sat on the living room floor, flipping through the pages of a book about animals. Daniel listened patiently to every half-remembered fact Leo enthusiastically recited. Over the following weeks, Daniel became a consistent presence. He didn't just show up. He made an effort. He learned Leo's routines, what snacks he liked, what time he got tired, what songs he wanted to hear at bedtime, even though Maria was still the one to put him down. They went on walks to the park together, and Daniel would push Leo on the swing until the boys' laughter filled the air. They sat on benches with dripping popsicles, and Daniel would listen to Leo's 4-year-old thoughts on the moon, on dogs, on how superheroes probably got tired sometimes too. At first, Maria stayed close during their time together, cautious and protective, looking for signs of inconsistency or discomfort. But Daniel never crossed a line. He didn't rush anything. He didn't press for Leo to call him dad or even for long visits alone. He simply showed up and stayed. And slowly, Maria began to lower her guard, even if she didn't say it aloud. One night, after Leo had gone to bed, she and Daniel sat across from each other in the dim kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken questions. She poured 2 cups of tea, and they sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. "You're really trying," she said quietly, finally breaking the silence. He looked up at her, his expression serious but weary. "Because I lost 4 years. I can't fix that, but I'm not going to lose any more." Maria looked at her cup. "You know, he didn't ask about a dad until recently. Not because he felt like he was missing something, but because other kids started talking about theirs. I wasn't sure what to say. I told him every family is different, and he seemed to be okay with that." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "I should have been there. If only. If I had just fought harder to understand why you said what you said, maybe." She cut him off softly. "It's not all your fault. You believed what I told you. I didn't give you a reason not to. I believed it because I was afraid it was true," she admitted. "Because I didn't think I deserved that kind of happiness. I thought it made more sense for me to lose you." She looked up at him, surprised. "Did you really think that?" He nodded slowly. "My parents raised me to think love had to be practical, clean, strategic, what we had. It scared me, because it was real." She leaned back, letting his words settle in her chest. "It was real," she said, "and terrifying." They both smiled faintly, the first shared moment of sweetness in years, the kind that didn't erase the past, but acknowledged it. After that night, something shifted between them. Maria began inviting him to dinner. Once a week, Daniel started reading to Leo at bedtime. He learned to perfectly roll the boy's favorite blanket for naps. He celebrated Leo's small victories, like learning to tie his shoes or write his own name without reversing the letters. Leo, in turn, started to ask for Daniel more. He would wait by the window, and when he knew he was coming, he would run to him at the door and cuddle up next to him on the couch during cartoons. He didn't call him Dad, not yet. But Maria noticed how his eyes would light up in ways she had never seen before. He felt safe, seen, loved. One night, as Maria was tucking Leo into bed, he asked sleepily, "Why does Nick come over so much now?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because he cares about you a lot." "Is he going to stay forever?" Maria's throat tightened. "Do you want him to stay?" Leo nodded, already half asleep. "I like it when he's here. It feels warm." And in that moment, Maria felt her own heart open a little wider. Maybe the past couldn't be rewritten, but maybe the future didn't have to carry the same weight. Maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about choosing what came next. The last battle. Daniel knew that rebuilding a relationship with Leo and Maria was only one part of what he had to face. The deeper war was still ahead, against the people who had manipulated and silenced her, the very people who had controlled every corner of his life since childhood. His parents had molded him, shaped him, and trained him to become the perfect heir. But he now saw with brutal clarity what their love had always been: conditional, calculating, and dangerous. He could no longer look at them the same way, and he knew that the moment he stood up for Maria and Leo, there would be no turning back. He scheduled a meeting with them at the family estate. No assistants, no business pretexts. Just him, standing alone in the drawing room, where generations of Hayes men had made decisions that built empires. His mother arrived first, elegantly composed as always, her lips painted like armor. His father walked in minutes later, radiating authority with every step. Daniel stood his ground, calm on the outside, but burning on the inside. They offered polite greetings, clearly oblivious to what was coming. But the moment Daniel mentioned Maria's name, his father's jaw tightened. His mother looked toward the window, already emotionally checking out, as if she could pretend the conversation wasn't happening. Daniel didn't let them deflect. He told them everything. That he had found Maria again. That Leo was his son. That he had lost 4 years of fatherhood because of their lies. His voice remained steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. He accused them not just of manipulation, but of cruelty, of stealing time. Love, the most important relationship of his life. His father scoffed, saying he had done what was necessary to protect his name. That Maria was a liability, that she had no status, no connections, no future worth investing in. His mother's voice followed, icy and elegant, claiming that Daniel's judgment had always been clouded by emotion, and that he would eventually thank them. But he didn't thank them. He stood taller and told them they were wrong. That Maria had more strength, integrity, and loyalty than anyone in their social circle. That Leo was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that his only regret was not walking away from them sooner. His father threatened legal action. He tried to remind him of financial obligations and inheritance clauses. But Daniel cut him off coldly. He didn't care anymore. He was willing to give up every cent, every share, every seat on every board, if that's what it took. His life was not for sale. His son was not a mistake, and he would not sacrifice real love for a polished facade ever again. By the time the conversation ended, the silence between them was permanent. His parents didn't follow him out. They didn't ask him to reconsider. They simply stood there, rooted in a world he no longer belonged to. The days that followed were complicated. Lawyers called. Accounts were frozen. Business partners whispered. But Daniel carried on anyway. He sold shares of the company he had helped build. He announced his departure from the board and began planning his own venture. A small but ambitious tech startup with a mission rooted in transparency and accessibility, not elitism and control. He didn't know if he would succeed, but he knew it would be honest, and it would be his. Meanwhile, back in Fairhill, Maria watched all of this unfold with a mix of awe and fear. She hadn't asked him to do it. She didn't expect him to give up everything. But as he showed up for dinner again and again, exhausted but present, bruised but determined, she began to understand the depth of his choice. He wasn't just trying to play house. He was fighting for a life no one had ever allowed him to have before. One night, after Leo had fallen asleep on the couch with a book propped against his chest, Daniel sat next to Maria, rubbing his eyes to ease the fatigue. "I think I finally understand what it means to fight for something," he said. "Not for profit, not for pride, but because it's the right thing to do." Maria reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had in years. "And now you have something worth fighting for." He didn't speak. He simply squeezed her hand tightly, grateful, humbled, and finally, truly free. The beginning of forever. The morning sun filtered softly through the pale curtains of Maria's kitchen, casting a gentle glow over the modest space where so much of her life had unfolded. Meals, laughter, exhaustion, silent tears. The last few months had brought changes she could never have imagined, and though she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Leo, she felt the shift in every breath. Daniel had become a part of their daily rhythm. He was no longer a surprise visitor or a tentative presence, but someone who showed up consistently, with muddy sneakers, hair messy from chasing Leo in the park, and eyes that no longer had the sharp edges of a corporate executive, but the quiet warmth of a man who was reclaiming his soul. Maria noticed it more every day, the way Daniel would anticipate what Leo needed before he asked for it. The way he would ask Maria what she needed, even when she brushed it off. The way he paid attention to the small things. How Leo hated the crust on his toast. How Maria never drank her coffee hot. How they both lit up when they danced together in the living room with no music playing. It was in these details that she realized how deeply Daniel was rebuilding not only his life, but hers as well. But even as her guard began to slowly lower, she still fought against fear. It was one thing to fall in love with Daniel Hayes once, when she was younger, more naive, believing that love could protect her from the world. It was another thing to risk her heart again now that she had Leo, now that she had so much more to lose. She didn't doubt his intentions, but her instinct to protect her son was still fierce. She needed to be sure that if she opened the door completely, it would stay open. Daniel seemed to understand this without being told. He never pressured her. Instead, he found quiet ways to prove his worth. He fixed the broken kitchen drawer without being asked. He took Leo to the doctor when he had a fever. He stayed up late helping Maria prepare materials for her new job at the clinic. When Maria's car wouldn't start, he showed up before dawn with jumper cables and coffee. Not to impress her, not to earn points, but because he was now just there, in all the ways that mattered. One night, after a long day of preschool work and errands, they all sat on the worn living room sofa, Leo nestled between them, a blanket tucked up to his chin. He had fallen asleep halfway through a story, and Maria found herself watching Daniel as he gently brushed the hair from his forehead. There was something so unguarded in his expression, something that made her chest ache. She hadn't planned on saying anything, but the words slipped out before she could stop them. "You're a good father." Daniel didn't look at her immediately. He kept watching Leo sleep, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to be. I still feel like I've missed so much." "You can't get those years back," she said softly, "but you can have the rest." He turned to her then, and their eyes met in the dim light. "Is that something I'm allowed to hope for?" She hesitated, not out of doubt, but because she knew what that moment meant. She had held up her walls for so long, convinced that tearing them down would only bring pain. But the man sitting next to her wasn't the same man she had once feared to lose. He had fought for them. He had chosen them. He had changed for them. "You don't have to hope for it," she said. Her voice trembled. "You're already a part of it." Daniel took her hand slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. Their fingers intertwined with an ease, as if they had never been separated. The silence between them was no longer filled with regret, but with possibility. A few days later, they took Leo on his first real trip out of town. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet weekend near the coast, where the waves lapped softly against the sand, and the sky stretched out endlessly above them. Maria hadn't been back to the beach since the last time they had been there together, when the world still felt full of promise and everything had gone wrong. But this time was different. Leo shrieked with delight as he chased seagulls and built wobbly castles, and Daniel ran alongside him, laughing so openly that Maria barely recognized the man he used to be. When the sun set over the horizon and they sat together wrapped in towels, Daniel put his arms around both of them, and Maria leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. That night, as they tucked Leo into the small rental cottage, Daniel stood in the doorway, watching him sleep. Maria came up behind him and whispered, "It feels complete now," and Daniel nodded, his voice husky. "It does." Later, as they stood outside under the stars, barefoot on the deck, Daniel turned to her, his eyes searching. "I don't need you to answer me tonight," he said quietly, but I need you to know that this isn't temporary. I want a life with you, with both of you, whatever that entails, for as long as it takes." Maria looked at him, the sea breeze tangling her hair. "I don't have an answer," she said sincerely. "Not yet, but I believe you." That was enough. For now. They didn't need grand declarations or the perfect moment. They just needed each other, and for the first time in years, they both believed in something that once seemed lost forever. A future, messy, uncertain, and beautiful, that was entirely theirs to build. The ending of this story is a rare kind of full circle, one that doesn't erase the pain of the past, but transforms it into something stronger. What makes it powerful isn't just that love returns, it's how it returns. Scarred, humbled, and rebuilt with honesty and persistence. Daniel and Maria don't get a fairy tale. They earn their way back to each other, one moment at a time, choosing love after betrayal, trust after silence, and hope after years of loss. The final scenes don't offer perfection, and that's exactly what makes them so satisfying. Life didn't turn out how either of them planned, and yet what they created afterward, a family built not on illusion but on truth, is so much more meaningful. Their happy ending isn't in grand gestures, but in quiet mornings, unspoken forgiveness, and the laughter of the child who mended what was broken. For me, it's a story about redemption, but more importantly, about courage. The courage to face what hurt, to admit what was wrong, and to keep believing that love is worth it. What did you think of the new name choices and the story's ending? Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption and love.